Club Deportivo Guadalajara, better known as Chivas or Llano Sagrado, is one of the most historic, important and winning teams in the Mexican League. It is based in the city of Guadalajara, capital of the state of Jalisco. Guadalajara competes in Liga MX in the highest category of Mexican football. This club is one of the oldest in Aztec football, as its foundation dates back to May 8, 1906. In 116 years of life, it has accumulated 12 league championships, 4 Copa MX, 7 Campeón de Campeones, and 2 CONCACAF champions. Foundation. It was the year 1906 when the Belgian, Edgar Everard, together with Rafael and Gregorio Orozco, decided to found the Union Football Club, which was the first name that the Guadalajara club had. The then club Union played its first match wearing a white t-shirt and being directed by Rafael Orozco. The first rival they faced was Gimnasio Atletico Occidental. It was the same coach who also served as president and, at the suggestion of Everard, the traditional stripes arrived red, which emulated the flag of the city of Bruges in Belgium. The name change came on February 26, 1908 and they were renamed Guadalajara. In the first years the Guadalajara club had players from Belgium, Spain, France and Mexico. In the amateur era, the team won 12 titles and with this, soccer in the state of Jalisco began to take off. It was not until the professional era, in the 1943-44 season, when the club decided to play with only Mexican players. The nickname Chivas came in the 1940s, when a local newspaper said the following: they played races and the Chivas won 1-0, this after having defeated Tampico on match day 2. Atlas fans took the nickname as a joke, however it became a symbol for the red and white team. The shield, the classic Guadalajara shield, is attributed to legendary players and managers of the club such as Angel Ballooner, Everardo and Jose Espinoza. In addition to Villalvazo, the design of the shield contains the colors of the uniform which is based on the city of Bruges. In addition, part of the shield has similarities with the flag of the Flanders region in Belgium, combined with the coat of arms of the city of Guadalajara. The meaning of each element is essential to understand more deeply what the team symbolizes. The blades symbolize the leader undefeated in combat, the spear is prudence and strength, the border is the symbolization of bravery, the lion represents a generous warrior spirit, the tree in the center symbolizes perseverance. The Guadalajara club shield is one of the few in Mexican soccer that has a lot of representation of what the team is internally. Later the shield stopped showing the stars that symbolized the league titles in the first division. Although the club has had different emblems throughout history, each one faithfully represents Guadalajara. The club's first shield was the one with the initials CG embroidered on the front of each shirt. A few years later, in 1911, the same shield would maintain the initials CG, however the C took on a snake shape that was intertwined with the G. By 1917, the Guadalajara shield would have a radical change, the vertical rectangle with the background dominated by red and white lines, in the center a rhombus that had a blue G inside. This shield has been used again in the team's alternative designs. In 1923, the first shield was born that has evolved until reaching the one we know today, where small changes have made a big difference, without forgetting tradition. In 2009, a modernized shield was presented, which the fans immediately rejected and returned to the traditional one. The stadiums, given the need for Deportivo Guadalajara to have its own place to play its matches, Jorge Vergara's idea arose to plan the construction of an avant-garde stadium in keeping with the history of the flock. Having its own stadium was one of Vergara's objectives when he bought the club in 2002. Chivas was leaving what was its home for 50 years, 1960 to 2010, the historic Jalisco Stadium, which witnessed several Raja Blancos championships. From the 1960 to CONCACAF final and the CONCACAF Champions first leg final in 2007 against Pachuca. The construction of the new stadium began on May 7, 2007 and was inaugurated on July 30, 2010 against Manchester United, with Javier Hernandez, the first scorer in the history of the building, who had been transferred to the Red Devils team from the Premier. The score ended 3-2 in favor of Chivas. The first scorer in an official match was Adolfo "Bofo" Batista in a Copa Libertadores first leg match against Interporto Alegre. At first it was baptized as Amleth Stadium due to the businessman's trademark, then it became Chivas Stadium and recently it was named Akron Stadium due to sponsorship issues. The era of the champion. There was a time when Guadalajara began to form a team that dominated and performed well on the field. However, they accumulated a series of runners-up finishes between league and cup during the years of 1950 and 1956, for which the team received the nickname Ymrito, the popular Mexican expression to mention that one is close to achieving something. But all this began to change when Federico Gonzalez took over the presidency of the club, and names like Juan El Bigoton Jasso, Guillermo El Tigre Septi El Vida, Damayacan Villadis and, of course, Salvador Reyes, among others, began to be figures. In a short time, the Guadalajara Sports Club went from already deserving to very champion. It was considered the golden era of the club at a professional level between the years 1956 to 1965. In a period of 9 years they won 7 league titles, 6 Champion of Champions, the Mexico Cup and CONCACAF tournament. The first title came in 1956-57 thanks to a last-minute goal by Chava Reyes against Irapuato at Aplados Park with Uruguayan Don Alderos as coach. For 1958-59, the Hungarian Arpad Fiki would arrive as the new helmsman, and they would win the second against Atlante by a score of 4-0 with a double from Chava Reyes, Juan Bigoton Jasso and Ravel Quina Orlano. With fate in charge, 3 more league championships would come: 1959-60, 1960-61, and the flock would accumulate 4. In 1961 Javier de la Torre returned to the technical direction of the team with Thomas Balcazar as his assistant. With this, Guadalajara would win 3 more leagues, consecutively: 1961-62, 1963-64, 1964-65, exercising almost a decade of complete dominance in Mexican soccer, where they would receive the nickname El Campeonismo. Classics. Classic Tapacion. The classic Guadalajara emerged with the birth of Atlas in 1926. The culture of Atlas represented the upper class of Guadalajara, while the Raja Blancos represented the middle class. More than sportingly, the classic emerged from the social classes in the state of Jalisco, with little data to verify its veracity. It is said that the first duel between both squads took place a year after the birth of the Red and Black, in 1917. This classic ended 18-0 in favor of Atlas, although this version was denied by the historic Chivas goalkeeper, Jaime Tubo Gomez, saying that Atlas won the game, but it was not by such a number of goals. One of the most notable moments of this rivalry was when Tubo Gomez decided to borrow a magazine from the audience and sat down to read it, since the red and white team was ahead on the scoreboard and had control of the game. That is one of the historical postcards of the classic Tapacion. The rivalry began to take on more mischief when in 1951, Atlas became champion of Mexican soccer, facing Guadalajara. With referee controversy, the game was decided with a penalty in favor of the Red and Blacks and gave them their first title. Given that impression, the director of the Red and Whites, Angel Bolmar, suffered a devastating heart attack. Gomez, goalkeeper of the flock, decided to cast a curse in which, as long as he lived, Atlas could not become champion. The goalkeeper died in 2008. But said curse ended in 2021, where the Red and Black team took the championship. National Classic. The National Classic Chivas vs. America was born on November 12, 1959. The statements of the coach of the Mexico City team, after winning the match with a score of 0-2, penetrated deep into the red and white team, and then they responded by beating them 2-0. Different factors accumulated so that this division began to exist within the country. One of the main factors was how they sold the teams prior to the duels. Different titles such as Mexicanos vs. Extranjeros, Heroes vs. Milanos, all of this promoted by the television station, Telesistema Mexicano. As Icarra Milmos, in 1959, acquired Club America and, being the owner of the most important television station in the country, began to create a rooting campaign for the club. The 1960s were dominated by Guadalajara, which after a great harvest of titles was called El Campeonismo. America served as the antagonist at that time, and it was the perfect time to give the duel more popularity. As the years go by, with very different ideologies, both teams rank as the top winners of Mexican soccer. Chivas, with its tradition of playing with only Mexicans, has won 12 trophies, while America, with its policy of having the best foreigners, has crowned 13 times. Despite the creation of other classics today, the National Classic always provokes a lot of anticipation. The end of the century, In the 1983-84 season, the title series was played for the first time between Chivas and America. In the first game, the duel ended tied at 2 scores. For the second leg, there was a multifaceted duel where there was one sent off, 2 missed penalties, and the result of all these actions gave America the winner, thus lifting the champion trophy against its arch-rival with a score of 5-3. The Verde era. Although Guadalajara had not long won the 1997 title, the club's sporting and financial situation was not the best. By 2022 the bottom had been hit, and in October of that same year, Jorge Verde took over the administration of the institution, acquiring the certificates of the members and purchasing the team that was rented from the Guadalajara sports promoter. He wanted full ownership of the club, converting what was a civil association into a public limited company, which generated quite a few differences with the companies at the beginning. Verde began to make decisions very early. Removed excess advertising on uniforms. In 2004 he appointed the Dutchman Hans Westerhof, who won tournament after taking the bench, would be lead runner-up against the Pumas. Chivas began to gain relevance at the international level, reaching the semi-finals consecutively in the Copa Libertadores against Atletico Paranaense and Sao Paulo in 2005 and 2006. In 2006, José Manuel de la Torre was appointed as technical director. In their first tournament they remained in the semifinals against Pachuca, but in the second year, the first title of the Verde era arrived, the long-awaited 11th title, against the Diablos Rojos de Toluca by an aggregate score of 3-2. In that semester they entered the league through the playoffs, where they eliminated America in the semifinals. Copa Libertadores Final 2010. 2010 was a great year for Club Deportivo Guadalajara. They broke league records and put their name at the top of the international scene. That year's Copa Libertadores meant reaching the first final for the Chivas team and the second in history for a Mexican team in the most important CONMEBOL tournament at the club level. Their path to this stage began in 2009. In that edition, the Sacred Flock managed to qualify for the round of 16 by finishing second in their group, but due to the pandemic situation in Mexico due to the H1N1 flu, their rival, Sao Paulo, refused to play on Mexican soil and they did not accept to play in another country. Thus, FEMEXFUT decided to withdraw its participating teams from the tournament. For 2010, CONMEBOL decided to compensate the Mexican teams for last year's situation and granted them direct classification. Thus, Chivas started from the final phase of the championship. Although now, the Rojiblancos, who at that time were led by José Luis Real, had a problem, as they had several casualties due to the players they contributed to the Mexican national team heading to the World Cup that year. With outstanding performances by the substitute goalkeeper Liborio Sanchez and its historic scorer Omar Bravo, Guadalajara managed to beat Vélez Sarsfield without much problem in the round of 16 and Libertad of Paraguay in the quarterfinals. For the semifinal, they received the UD Chile at the Azteca Stadium, a venue from which they sought to take greater advantage due to their historical height and way to obtain a pass to the next round. In the grand final they faced Internacional de Porto Alegre with their teams back. The first leg was played at the newly inaugurated Commonwealth Stadium. Chivas started the game winning with a goal from Adolfo Batista, but they ended up losing 1-2. The second leg was a roller coaster of emotions that made the red and white fans dream, but they were unable to lift the cup in a very hostile environment and ended up losing 3-2. Even so, his performance will forever be marked in the history books of the institution. Top scorer, Omar Bravo Tordesillas debuted with the Chivas shirt on February 17, 2001. From that day, the native of Los Mochis, Sinaloa, would have a date with destiny, that of becoming a historic player for the red and white institution. Nobody imagined what that young man, 21 years old at the time, would achieve later. For many years, Salvador Reyes was the top scorer in the history of Club Deportivo Guadalajara with 154 goals. The closest pursued was Jorge Valdivia, who stayed at 98 goals. Little by little, Bravo Tordesillas was climbing the ranks to be able to compete for said title. Omar Bravo stood out from his early years and scored important goals for the red and white shirt. At 26 years old, he was already selected for the 2004 Athens Olympic Games, the 2005 Confederations Cup and the 2006 World Cup in Germany. Bravo was also a key player in Chivas winning the league championship in the 2006 Apertura. On April 26, 2008, he scored his 100th goal with the Chivas shirt against Puebla, and, a few weeks later, he signed with Deportivo La Coruña in Spain to fulfill his European dream. His time in the old continent was not as expected, and, after playing for a brief moment with Tigres, Bravo would return to Chivas in 2009 to continue scoring goals in his fight to beat the ultimate net breaker. After being a key player in the 2010 Copa Libertadores, Omar would leave the club again to have new challenges in Mexico and the United States, including with Guadalajara city rival, Atlas. In 2013 he returned to live his last stage as a red and white player and establish himself as a club legend. On the night of August 12, 2015, Omar Bravo tied and surpassed Salvador Frey's 122 goals in the league after scoring the double against Morelia. In that tournament, Bravo scored another double against America at the Azteca Stadium to reach 155 goals in all competitions. Finally, Bravo retired from Chivas in 2016 and with 160 goals in total, being the top scorer in the history of Guadalajara. The ghost of dissent after having lived through times of international glory and a great first year in its new stadium, Chivas began to plunge into serious problems. Their new house began to be problematic, as they were not obtaining the expected results. Of that team that became the super leader of the Mexican Championship and finalist of the Copa Libertadores, little and nothing remained. Figures of the stature of Johan Cruyff arrived in Guadalajara in search of returning the institution to the top, but the attempts were in vain. The people from Guadalajara began to add defeats. They played tournaments without entering the league. They were losing their figures little by little until the catastrophe occurred. One of the most historic and winning teams in the history of Aztec football got into the fight to avoid relegation. Something that perhaps seemed very difficult to happen. For the 2014-15 season, Chivas would directly fight for its permanence in the top circuit with Puebla, Dorados de Sinaloa and Leones Negros of the UDG. Chivas looked for high-quality reinforcements such as Angel Reina, Fernando Arce and the return of Carlos Salcido to achieve his goal. However, things were not going well and the difference with their rivals was minimal. José Manuel Chepo de la Torre, the last coach who had made Guadalajara champion, came to the rescue. The Clausura 2015 began to improve and little by little the Sacred Flock began to add wins and fight for league positions, although they were still very close to their rivals in the percentage. The game against Puebla was the key point, since there was only a 2-point difference, but a win could put them within 5 points with just a few games left. The match was held at the BUAP Stadium. Chivas suffered the match and started losing. The fans were suffering. Defeat would mean falling to the bottom of the percentage table and a big emotional blow. It was there where Eric El Cubo Torres came off the bench to score 2 goals in less than 5 minutes that gave Guadalajara the victory and its springboard that allowed them to ultimately win the battle to avoid relegation. He was a light in one of the club's darkest times. The recent era 10 years passed for Club Deportivo Guadalajara to lift the trophy in Liga MX again. After having lost a final against Chivas on penalties, the Rizano had its revenge in 2006 to obtain its 11th start from the hand of José Manuel Chepo de la Torre and the Bravo, Medina and Batista trident. Despite what was achieved, Chivas went through a tremendous drought and there was even talk of relegation in 2014 and 2015, but 2 years later everything would change when Jorge Vergara appointed Matias Almeida as technical director. Almeida soon gave Chivas its first title and in the 2015 Apertura, Guadalajara would lift the trophy again after beating Leon in the Copa MX final. This championship served as an impetus for the upcoming tournaments and it was in 2017 when Chivas was at its highest level with players like Rodolfo Pizarro, Alan Pulido, Orbelín Pineda, and others. Again, in the Clausura 2017, the Rizano would be Copa MX champions by beating Morelia in a penalty shootout and, a month later, Chivas would replicate the same, but now in the Liga MX after beating Tigres by an aggregate score of 4-3 overall. That's how the decade-long drought without a national championship ended. The Matias Almeida era would also accumulate 2 Copa MX championships, a Supercopa MX, the Liga MX title, and a CONCACAF Champions title in 2018. Club World Cup. After a final suffered in a penalty shootout at the Akron Stadium, Guadalajara won the CONCACAF Champions League. after beating Toronto FC by a score of 4-2 after a 3-goal aggregate draw, which would give them the pass to their first Club World Cup in the United Arab Emirates 2018. With a new face on the bench and with some departures from the squad, Chivas traveled hand in hand with Jose Saturnino Cardozo with the hope of going far in the Club World Cup, but their participation would end quickly. In the first round quarter-finals, the Flock would face Kachama, Asian champion, where the red and whites could not maintain their advantage that reached the third minute through the hands of Angel Zaldívar. The Japanese club would go up and the game would end with a 3-2 victory in favor of the Asians. Due to the defeat, Shibuya would play the match for 5th place where they would face the S2 Nips. This match would end with a 1-goal draw and 5th place would be determined from the penalty spot, but, unluckily for the Mexicans, the Flock would end their participation in the Club World Cup with a 6th place after having fallen 5-4 on penalties, thus catapulting the worst participation of a Mexican team in said contest. The present currently Guadalajara belongs to Amaury Vergara, who became the owner of the club after the death of his father Jorge. After the Matias Almeida era, the Rojablancos have found it difficult to return to the winning path, and names like Thomas Boy, Luis Fernando Tino, Victor Manuel Vucetich, Marcelo Michelino, have paraded through the first-team bench without achieving the long-awaited title 13. In addition to being one of the most winning clubs in Mexico, the Rebano is characterized by being one of those that has the best youth academy and has exported to European football, as with the cases of Carlos Salcido, Javier Rodriguez, Javier Chicharito Hernandez, among others. Likewise, they have won several tournaments in the various lower categories of the Liga MX, and without forgetting their 2 championships that Guadalajara already has in its women's branch, the most recent in Clausura 2022.